Sometimes a single moment can shatter everything you thought you knew about your family. For me, that moment came on a sweltering August afternoon in San Antonio when I watched my 16-year-old granddaughter Vanessa run upstairs in tears, her heart broken by the man I had grown to distrust over 18 long years. I am Serena Rodriguez, and at 60 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of family drama imaginable. After 35 years of teaching elementary school, I believed I understood the delicate dynamics of blended families, the careful balance needed when children from different marriages come together under one roof. But nothing prepared me for the cruelty I witnessed that day, or the decision I would have to make that would change our family forever. The house was eerily quiet now, except for the soft sounds of Vanessa sobbing behind her locked bedroom door. Downstairs in the living room, I had helped furnish the remnants of what should have been a joyful celebration lay scattered across the coffee table. 3 birthday cakes barely touched, colorful streamers hanging limply from the ceiling fan. And in the center of it all, 2 brand-new laptop computers in their pristine boxes, while my granddaughter sat empty-handed and devastated upstairs. You see, all 3 of my grandchildren were born in August. Vanessa on the 15th, Marcus on the 20th, and little Isabella on the 28th. For years, we had celebrated together, making it a month-long festival of joy and laughter. But this year, everything changed when my son-in-law Henry decided that only some children deserve equal treatment. I could still hear his words echoing in my mind, spoken with such casual cruelty that they took my breath away. When I asked why there were only 2 computers for 3 children, he looked me straight in the eye and said he only had enough money for children who shared his bloodline. He said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, as if Vanessa's 16 years in this family meant nothing because she didn't carry his DNA. The worst part wasn't just Henry's words, it was watching my daughter Emma's face crumble as she realized what kind of man she had married. It was seeing little Marcus and Isabella's confusion as they began to understand that their father was treating their sister differently. And it was the sound of Vanessa's footsteps pounding up those stairs, running away from the family gathering that had always been her safe haven. But here's what Henry didn't know, what none of them knew, this house we had all been living in for the past 4 years. It wasn't his. The deed had my name on it, and I had been keeping that secret since the day they moved in during the pandemic. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is the one nobody sees coming. What happened next would test every relationship in our family force, impossible choices, and ultimately teach us all what it really means to protect the people you love. If you have ever had to take a stand when family turns cruel, you will understand why I couldn't stay silent. Living with Emma's family revealed layers of complexity I had only glimpsed during holiday visits. Emma and Henry had been married for 18 years by then, a union that began when Vanessa was just 2 years old. Watching them navigate their blended family from the inside was like observing a carefully choreographed dance where not everyone knew the steps. Emma had been so young when she first married Vanessa's father, barely 20. That marriage crumbled under the weight of immaturity and different dreams, leaving her a single mother, working nights at the hospital while pursuing her nursing degree. When Henry came along stable and reliable with his warehouse management job, he seemed like the answer to her prayers. In those early years, Henry had been good to Vanessa. I remembered him teaching her to ride a bike in our old neighborhood patient and encouraging as she wobbled down the sidewalk. He had attended her school plays, helped with homework, and for all appearances, embraced his role as stepfather. Emma glowed with happiness, finally feeling like she had found someone who would love both her and her daughter unconditionally. Then Marcus arrived when Vanessa was 4, followed by Isabella 2 years later. Suddenly, the family dynamic shifted in ways that were subtle, at first almost imperceptible. Henry's attention naturally gravitated toward his biological children, which seemed normal enough. All parents have special bonds with their own offspring, I told myself. But living in the house, day after day, I began noticing patterns that troubled me. When Marcus needed help with his math homework, Henry would patiently work through problems for hours. When Vanessa asked for the same help, he would suggest she ask her mother or look it up online. Marcus got brand-name soccer cleats for his team. Vanessa received discount store versions that fell apart after 2 months. Emma tried to bridge these gaps, working extra shifts to ensure Vanessa never went without. She would quietly buy her daughter the same quality clothes and supplies the younger children received, careful never to make Henry feel criticized or defensive. My daughter had become a master at keeping peace, sometimes at the expense of her own exhaustion. The children felt it too, though they couldn't articulate what was happening. Marcus and Isabella adored their big sister, but they began to sense an unspoken hierarchy in the household. Vanessa, now 16, and keenly aware of social dynamics, started spending more time in her room, building walls around her heart to protect herself from disappointment. From my vantage point, as the live-in grandmother, I watched Henry's subtle favoritism with growing concern. It wasn't overt enough to call out directly, not dramatic enough to justify confrontation. Just 1,000 small moments where his biological children received slightly more attention, slightly better treatment, slightly more benefit of the doubt. Emma saw it too. I am certain of that now. But she had invested so much in making this marriage work, in creating stability for all her children, that addressing Henry's bias felt like risking everything she had built. Sometimes love makes us blind to the very problems we most need to see. August had always been our family's most magical month. 3 birthdays in 13 days meant nearly 2 weeks of celebration, cake, and joy. Over the years, we had developed our own traditions around this birthday bonanza, turning what could have been an expensive burden into something beautifully special. Vanessa's birthday on the 15th always kicked off the festivities. As the eldest, she got to choose the first week's dinner menus and family activities. Marcus followed on the 20th with his love for outdoor adventures, usually requesting camping trips or barbecue parties in the backyard. Little Isabella closed out the month on the 28th, inevitably choosing princess themes and elaborate tea parties that had us all wearing tiaras. This year felt different from the moment we started planning. Vanessa had just turned 16 in July. Wait, that's not right. She was turning 16 this August, and the milestone felt significant. She had been talking about getting a part-time job, saving for a car, dreaming about college applications. There was something bittersweet about watching her stand on the threshold of young adulthood, especially knowing how hard she had worked to maintain her grades while navigating the complicated dynamics of our household. Marcus, now 14, was deep in his sports obsession phase. Every conversation revolved around football tryouts, basketball camp, or the latest athletic shoes he had seen online. He had Henry's sturdy build and competitive spirit qualities that earned him extra attention and praise from his father. Isabella, at 12, remained our family's sunshine, still believing in magic and fairness, with the pure heart of a child who hadn't yet learned that the world could be cruel. Emma had suggested we do something extra special this year. Maybe plan a weekend getaway to Galveston or organize a combined party that would feel grown up enough for Vanessa while still being fun for the younger kids. The idea excited all of us, and we spent weeks discussing possibilities around the dinner table. But I started noticing Henry's absence from these planning conversations. He would listen with half an ear scrolling through his phone or suddenly remembering work calls he needed to make. When Emma asked his opinion about party themes or gift ideas, he would give vague responses that didn't commit to anything specific. Then came the secretive shopping trips. Henry would disappear on Saturday mornings, claiming he needed to run errands, but returning with bags he quickly hid in his truck. When Emma asked about his mysterious purchases, he would smile and say he was working on surprise gifts that she would have to wait and see, like everyone else. At the time, his secrecy seemed sweet, even romantic. Emma was charmed by the idea that her husband was planning something special for the children. We all were. None of us imagined that Henry's surprises would exclude one of the birthday celebrants entirely. The first hint of trouble came when I overheard him on the phone with his brother discussing his budget for the month. He mentioned something about 2 gifts, expensive ones, but being careful to stay within his spending limits. 2 gifts for 3 children. The math didn't add up, but I pushed my concerns aside, telling myself I must have misunderstood. The truth about Henry's shopping trips began unraveling on a humid Tuesday morning in early August. I had gotten up early to water the plants on the front porch when I saw Henry loading something bulky into his truck bed covered by an old tarp. When he noticed me watching, he gave an awkward wave and called out that he was just moving some work equipment. But work equipment doesn't come in boxes with electronics store logos peeking out from underneath tarps. Later that day, while Emma was at the hospital pulling a double shift, I found Henry in the garage, hunched over his laptop with multiple browser tabs open. From where I stood in the doorway, I could see he was comparing prices on computers, sleek silver laptops that looked expensive and impressive, the kind of gifts that would make any teenager's eyes light up with joy. He was so absorbed in his research that he didn't notice me at first. I watched him add items to online shopping carts, calculate totals, and cross-reference specifications. What struck me wasn't just his thoroughness, but his focus. He was clearly investing significant time and energy into finding the perfect computers. When he finally looked up and saw me, his reaction was telling. Instead of the excitement you would expect from someone planning wonderful surprises, he quickly closed the laptop and became defensive. He muttered something about browsing for work stuff, but his face had guilt written all over it. That evening, I decided to test my growing suspicions. During dinner, I casually brought up birthday gift ideas, mentioning how excited all 3 kids would be to see what surprises awaited them. Henry's response chilled me to the bone. He looked directly at Emma and said he had been thinking about getting some really nice gifts this year, something meaningful that would last. Then he glanced at Marcus and Isabella, with a warm smile completely skipping over Vanessa, as if she wasn't sitting right there at the table. Vanessa noticed. Of course she noticed. At 16, she was acutely aware of every nuance in family interactions, every slight or inclusion that revealed where she stood in the household hierarchy. I saw her shoulders tense slightly, watched her push food around her plate instead of eating. The final piece of the puzzle came when I was cleaning the living room later that week and found a crumpled receipt that had fallen behind the couch cushions. It was from a major electronics retailer, dated just 2 days earlier. 2 laptop computers, identical models, with a total that made my retired teacher's heart skip a beat. These weren't modest gifts. They were significant investments, the kind of presents that would be talked about and treasured for years. 2 laptops, not 3. The receipt confirmed what my instincts had been telling me for days. Henry hadn't forgotten about Vanessa's birthday gift. He had deliberately excluded her from his plans. This wasn't an oversight or a budget constraint. This was a calculated decision to treat his stepchild as less deserving than his biological children. As I held that receipt in my hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a fury so pure and protective that it took my breath away. The morning of our combined birthday celebration arrived with typical August heat, the kind that makes San Antonio feel like a furnace by 10 in the morning. Despite the weather, the house buzzed with excitement as we prepared for what should have been one of our happiest family traditions. Emma had taken the day off from the hospital, a rare luxury that required weeks of advance planning. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, decorating 3 separate birthday cakes, chocolate for Vanessa vanilla, with strawberry filling for Marcus, and the elaborate princess castle cake that Isabella had been dreaming about since June. The kids were electric with anticipation. Vanessa, trying to maintain her 16-year-old cool, couldn't quite hide her excitement as she helped arrange chairs in the living room. Marcus kept pestering everyone about when gift time would start, while Isabella flitted around the house in her favorite purple dress, convinced this would be the best birthday party in the history of birthdays. I found myself watching Henry with the intensity of a hawk circling its prey. He had been unusually quiet all morning, disappearing periodically to his truck and returning empty-handed, claiming he was checking on something. The nervous energy radiating from him was almost palpable, but I was the only one who seemed to notice. Around noon, Henry made an announcement that stopped all our preparations cold. He said he needed to run one quick errand before the party officially started something about picking up the special surprises he had been planning. Emma beamed at him, grateful that her husband was putting so much effort into making their children happy. When he returned an hour later, my heart sank. He carried 2 identical laptop bags, expensive-looking cases that screamed high-end electronics. 2 bags, not 3. He set them carefully on the side table in the living room, positioning them where everyone could see them. But no one could miss the count. Vanessa was the first to notice, of course. She stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, her face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally, a carefully constructed mask of indifference that broke my heart. At 16, she had already learned to protect herself by expecting disappointment. Emma was arranging candles on the cakes, humming softly to herself, still blissfully unaware of what was about to unfold. Marcus and Isabella were practically vibrating with excitement, their eyes fixed on those laptop bags like they contained the secrets of the universe. The room felt charged with tension that only half of us understood. I positioned myself where I could watch everyone's faces, knowing that whatever happened next would change our family forever. The receipt I had found was folded in my pocket, concrete evidence of Henry's premeditated cruelty. As we gathered around the decorated table, with its 3 beautiful cakes and carefully wrapped presents, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a disaster in slow motion. The children we loved were about to learn a harsh lesson about favoritism and blood versus chosen family, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Henry cleared his throat and announced it was time for the special surprises. What happened next will be seared into my memory until the day I die. Henry stood beside those 2 laptop bags with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to be celebrated as the world's most generous father. The cruel irony was that he genuinely seemed to think his actions were reasonable, even admirable. He reached for the first bag with theatrical flair, clearly enjoying the attention. Marcus and Isabella were practically bouncing in their seats, while Vanessa remained frozen in that heartbreaking pose of forced indifference. Emma watched with proud anticipation, still completely unaware that her husband was about to shatter our family gathering. Henry presented the first laptop to Marcus with a speech about hard work and bright futures. Our 14-year-old grandson was speechless, running his hands over the sleek silver surface like he couldn't believe it was real. The second laptop went to Isabella, who squealed with delight and immediately wanted to know if it came with games already installed. Then came the silence. That awful stretching silence where everyone in the room began to realize that the gift-giving had apparently concluded. Vanessa sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, but I could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest as she fought to maintain her composure. Emma was the first to speak, her voice carefully measured in the way nurses learn to stay calm during medical emergencies. She asked Henry if there might be another gift, perhaps something for Vanessa, that he had forgotten in the truck. That's when Henry delivered the words that would haunt us all. He looked around the room with what I can only describe as casual indifference and explained that he had only had enough money in his budget for 2 computers. Then, as if this clarification wasn't devastating enough, he added the part that made my blood turn to ice. He said he had decided to focus his gift-giving on the children who shared his bloodline, speaking those words like they were perfectly reasonable, like genetic connection was the only currency that mattered in our family. He didn't whisper this explanation or show any awareness of how cruel it sounded. He announced it with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing the weather. The room exploded into chaos. Not loud chaos worse than that. The kind of quiet devastation that follows when something precious shatters beyond repair. Emma's face went through a series of expressions I had never seen before. Confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a rage that transformed my gentle daughter into someone I barely recognized. Marcus and Isabella looked between their father and their sister with the dawning understanding that something terrible had just happened. And Vanessa, my beautiful, strong granddaughter, simply stood up from her chair with dignity that would have made queens weep. She looked directly at Henry and said she understood perfectly. Then she walked toward the stairs with measured steps, each one echoing in our suddenly silent living room. I found my voice just as we heard her bedroom door close upstairs. I asked Henry to repeat what he had just said, hoping I had misunderstood. He repeated it word for word without shame. The sound of Vanessa's bedroom door slamming shut reverberated through the house like a gunshot. In the suffocating silence that followed, we could all hear it, the muffled sound of 16 years of accumulated hurt finally breaking free. My granddaughter was crying, and it wasn't the dramatic sobbing of a teenager denied a desired toy. These were the deep, wrenching sobs of a child who had just had her worst fears confirmed. Emma had gone pale, staring at her husband, like she was seeing him for the first time. Marcus clutched his new laptop awkwardly, the joy completely drained from his face as he began to understand what his gift had cost his sister. Isabella kept asking why Vanessa was upset, her 12-year-old mind struggling to process the cruelty she had just witnessed. Henry incredibly seemed annoyed by our reactions. He muttered something about people being too sensitive, about how he had worked hard for his money and had every right to spend it how he chose. The casual dismissal in his voice made me want to shake him until his teeth rattled. I excused myself from that toxic atmosphere, claiming I needed to check on Vanessa, but really, I needed to think. As I climbed those stairs, listening to my granddaughter's heartbreak, I felt something crystallizing inside me, a resolve that had been building for months, but now hardened into diamond-sharp clarity. Vanessa wouldn't answer when I knocked, wouldn't let me in despite my gentle pleas. All I could do was sit outside her door and tell her through the wood that she was loved, that this wasn't her fault, that family meant so much more than blood. I am not sure she heard me over her own grief, but I had to try. When I finally went back downstairs, the party decorations looked obscene against the backdrop of our fractured family. Emma was mechanically cleaning up cake plates, while Henry had disappeared, probably to his garage, where he always retreated when confronted with emotions he didn't want to handle. That's when I saw it, another piece of paper on the floor near the couch, probably shaken loose. During all the commotion, I bent to pick it up and my heart nearly stopped. It was a receipt from a different store, dated a week earlier. This one showed a purchase I hadn't expected, 3 matching computer bags. 3 bags, not 2. 3! The implications hit me like a physical blow. Henry hadn't just decided to exclude Vanessa at the last minute due to budget constraints. He had originally planned to buy gifts for all 3 children. The receipt for the computer bags proved it. At some point between buying those bags and purchasing the actual computers, he had made a deliberate choice to exclude his stepdaughter. This wasn't financial necessity. This wasn't an oversight. This was calculated cruelty, and the evidence was right there in my trembling hands. I folded both receipts carefully and slipped them into my pocket. Henry had no idea what he had just unleashed, but he was about to learn that this grandmother had claws, and I wasn't afraid to use them. That evening, after the younger children had gone to bed, and Henry had retreated to his garage to avoid the tension still crackling through our house, I found Emma sitting alone at the kitchen table. She held a cup of cold coffee in her hands, staring at nothing, her face etched with the kind of exhaustion that comes from having your world tilted off its axis. I poured myself tea and sat across from her, the same spot where we had shared countless conversations over the past 4 years. But tonight felt different. Tonight, we weren't just mother and daughter sharing casual updates about our days. Tonight, we were 2 women who needed to have the hardest conversation of Emma's marriage. Emma spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she had suspected Henry treated Vanessa differently, but she had convinced herself it was subtle normal even. Stepdads couldn't be expected to feel exactly the same about stepchildren she had rationalized. As long as he wasn't cruel or abusive, she had told herself it was enough. But today had shattered those careful justifications. There was no explaining away what we had all witnessed, no way to reframe Henry's bloodline comment as anything other than deliberate exclusion. Emma's hands shook as she admitted she felt like she had failed. Vanessa failed as a mother and protector. I reached across the table and covered her trembling hands with mine. Then gently but firmly, I told her what she needed to hear. This wasn't her fault, but it was her responsibility to fix it. Vanessa had spent 14 years in this house, more than 3/4 of her life, watching her stepfather treat her as less than his biological children. Today's laptop incident wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was just the moment when Henry's favoritism became impossible to ignore. Emma broke down, then admitting things I had only suspected. How Henry never attended Vanessa's school events if they conflicted with Marcus or Isabella's activities. How he would make jokes about Vanessa's different last name that weren't really jokes at all. How he would suggest that certain family traditions or vacations were for his children, implying that Vanessa was somehow optional. My daughter had been walking a tightrope for years, trying to compensate for Henry's subtle rejections while avoiding confrontations that might destabilize their marriage. She had worked extra shifts to ensure Vanessa never went without exhausting herself to bridge gaps that Henry kept creating. I pulled out the receipts, then smoothing them on the table between us. Emma's face crumpled as she realized what they meant, that Henry's cruelty hadn't been impulsive or budget-driven. He had planned to exclude Vanessa from the very beginning, even as he went through the motions of preparing bags for all 3 children. The evidence was undeniable, and Emma couldn't retreat into her protective rationalizations anymore. Her husband had deliberately hurt her daughter, and no amount of wishing or hoping would change that fundamental truth. We sat in silence for several minutes, both understanding that our family had reached a crossroads. Emma could continue enabling Henry's favoritism, or she could finally put her children's well-being above her marriage's stability. The next morning, while Henry was at work and Emma was getting the younger children ready for their summer day camp, I made a decision that would cost me a significant chunk of my carefully saved retirement funds, and I didn't hesitate for a single second. I drove to the same electronics store where Henry had purchased his 2 laptops, my hands steady on the steering wheel despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. The young salesperson who helped me was probably wondering why a 60-year-old woman was asking so many detailed questions about gaming capabilities and processing speeds. But I had done my research the night before. I wanted Vanessa to have something even better than what Marcus and Isabella had received. Not to create competition between the children, but to send a clear message that her worth in this family wasn't determined by her DNA or her stepfather's narrow definition of belonging. The laptop I chose was sleek and powerful, with features that would serve Vanessa well through her remaining high school years and into college. As I handed over my credit card, I thought about all the small luxuries I would be giving up over the next few months to absorb this expense. No dinners out, no new clothes, no spontaneous purchases. It didn't matter. Some things are worth any sacrifice. But the computer itself was only part of my plan. I also purchased a beautiful carrying case, a wireless mouse, and a collection of software that would help with her schoolwork and creative interests. If Henry was going to make distinctions based on bloodlines, then I would show Vanessa exactly how much her chosen family valued her. The hardest part was smuggling everything into the house without being detected. I waited until everyone was busy with their afternoon routines, then quietly carried my purchases up to Vanessa's room. She was still nursing her hurt, spending most of her time behind that closed door, coming down only for meals where she maintained polite but distant conversation. I arranged everything on her desk while she was downstairs helping Emma with dinner preparations. The laptop perfectly positioned, the accessories arranged just so. And then I wrote a note that took me 3 attempts to get right. The note explained that love isn't measured in DNA percentages or blood connections, that families are built on choice commitment and the daily decision to show up for each other. I told her that she had been wanted and cherished in this house from the moment she had toddled through our front door at age 2, and that Henry's limitations didn't diminish her worth or her place in our hearts. I also included something that would become crucial to what happened next, a copy of the house deed, with my name clearly visible as the owner. It was time for some truths to come to light, and Vanessa deserved to know that her grandmother wasn't a charity case living on Henry's generosity. When Vanessa discovered her gifts that evening, her cry of surprise brought Emma running upstairs. The joy and relief on my granddaughter's face was worth every penny I had spent and every sacrifice I would have to make. Henry's reaction to discovering Vanessa's new laptop was everything I had expected, and worse. He stormed into the living room that evening, his face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from having your authority challenged. He demanded to know who had undermined his parenting decisions, who had dared to interfere with his household rules. When Vanessa quietly said her grandmother had given her the gift, Henry turned that fury directly on me. Standing in the center of what he believed was his living room, he launched into a tirade about boundaries and respect, about how I was a guest in his home and had no right to contradict his decisions about his children. His children, not our children. Not the family's children. His deliberate word choice wasn't lost on anyone present. Henry's voice grew louder as he worked himself into a righteous rage, telling me that if I couldn't respect his rules under his roof, perhaps I needed to find somewhere else to live. He was so caught up in his own indignation that he didn't notice Emma's face growing paler with each word, or the way Marcus and Isabella shrank back against the couch cushions. That's when I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I had been carrying for 4 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal its contents. I set it calmly on the coffee table and told Henry he was absolutely right about one thing: the homeowner did get to set the rules. Then I opened the folder and spread out the house deed, the mortgage documents marked paid in full, and the property tax records, all bearing my name in clear legal print. The silence that followed was deafening. Henry stared at the documents, like they were written in a foreign language, his brain struggling to process what his eyes were telling him. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized what I had kept hidden all these years. I explained in the calm voice I had used with difficult parents during my teaching career that this house belonged to me, that I had bought it before moving in with their family, choosing to let them believe I was their dependent rather than their landlord. I had done it to avoid complicating family dynamics, to let Henry feel like the provider and protector he needed to be. But Henry had just demonstrated that he couldn't be trusted with that authority. A man who would deliberately exclude a child from family celebrations, who would speak about bloodlines like they determined a person's worth, who would threaten to throw his wife's mother out of what he thought was his own home. That man had forfeited any right to set rules about how children in my house were treated. Henry's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He looked around the room with new eyes, seeing familiar furniture and family photos in a completely different context. Everything he had taken pride in owning, everything that had given him a sense of authority and control, belonged to the woman he had just tried to intimidate. The power dynamic in our household had just shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. If I expected Henry to feel ashamed or apologetic after learning he had been living in my house while treating my granddaughter like a second-class citizen, I was sadly mistaken. Instead of humility, the revelation seemed to trigger an even more defensive and hostile response from a man who clearly couldn't handle having his authority challenged. Henry began pacing the living room like a caged animal, his face cycling through emotions I had never seen before: shock, embarrassment, anger, and something that looked dangerously close to rage. When he finally found his voice, what came out wasn't an apology or acknowledgement of his cruelty toward Vanessa. Instead, he launched into a series of increasingly desperate justifications for his behavior. He insisted that his financial limitations were real, that he genuinely couldn't afford 3 expensive computers on his warehouse manager's salary. He pulled out his phone and started rattling off monthly expenses, the truck payment, insurance, groceries, utilities, as if creating a budget breakdown would somehow excuse his deliberate exclusion of Vanessa from the birthday celebration. When Emma quietly pointed out that he could have chosen less expensive gifts for all 3 children rather than extravagant ones for just 2, Henry's arguments became more convoluted. He claimed he had wanted to give his biological children something really special, something they would remember forever. The way he emphasized his children made it clear that Vanessa would never qualify for that category, regardless of how many years she had lived in our family. Most disturbing was his complete inability to see why his bloodline comment had been so hurtful. Henry actually had the audacity to argue that it was natural for a man to prioritize his genetic offspring, that anyone would understand his position if they thought about it logically. He spoke about biological instincts and parental bonds like he was delivering a nature documentary completely disconnected from the emotional devastation he had caused. When I mentioned the receipt showing he had originally planned to buy 3 computer bags, Henry's defensive walls went up even higher. He claimed that had been a mistake, that he had grabbed the wrong quantity while shopping quickly during his lunch break. But his explanation fell apart under the weight of evidence. The bags were purchased a full week before the computers plenty of time to exchange them if it had truly been an error. The most infuriating part was watching Henry try to turn himself into the victim of our confrontation. He complained about being ambushed with house ownership documents, about having his generosity questioned when he had been working hard to provide for the family. He even had the nerve to suggest that I had been dishonest by not revealing my ownership of the house as if my discretion somehow justified his treatment of Vanessa. Throughout his entire defensive rant, Henry never once acknowledged Vanessa's pain or offered her an apology. He never admitted that his actions had been wrong or that he understood why the family was upset. Instead, he doubled down on his position, insisting that his behavior had been reasonable and that everyone else was overreacting. It was becoming clear that Henry would never take responsibility for the hurt he had caused. For 18 years, I had watched my daughter Emma navigate her marriage like a diplomat, walking through a minefield, always careful not to trigger conflicts that might destabilize the family she had worked so hard to build. But watching her that night, as Henry continued his defensive tirade, without showing any remorse for hurting Vanessa, I saw something shift in Emma's eyes that told me her patience had finally reached its breaking point. Emma sat quietly through Henry's entire justification speech, her face growing more resolute with each word that failed to include an apology to her daughter. When he finally finished his defensive rant, she stood up, slowly, walked to where Vanessa was sitting on the stairs, listening to everything, and put a protective arm around her 16-year-old's shoulders. The gesture spoke volumes. After years of trying to keep peace between her husband and her eldest child, Emma was finally choosing a side, and it wasn't Henry's. When Emma spoke, her voice carried a strength I hadn't heard since she was a young mother fighting to build a better life for herself and baby Vanessa. She told Henry that she had spent nearly 2 decades making excuses for his behavior, convincing herself that his subtle favoritism was normal, that stepfamilies naturally had different dynamics than biological ones. But today had opened her eyes to the truth she had been avoiding. Henry didn't just prefer his biological children. He actively excluded and devalued Vanessa, treating her like a burden rather than a beloved family member. Emma couldn't pretend anymore that this was acceptable or that it would somehow improve with time. Emma's voice grew stronger as she outlined the pattern of Henry's behavior that she could no longer ignore. The missed school events, the unequal treatment, the casual cruelty of his comments about bloodlines and belonging. She had enabled it all by staying silent, by working extra shifts to compensate for Henry's emotional neglect, by teaching Vanessa to expect less rather than demanding Henry give more. The breaking point came when Emma looked directly at Henry and asked him one simple question. Could he honestly say he loved Vanessa the same way he loved Marcus and Isabella? Could he promise to treat all 3 children equally from this moment forward? Henry's answer, or rather his inability to give a clear answer, told Emma everything she needed to know. He stammered about different types of love, about natural bonds and biological connections, proving that even after everything that had happened, he still couldn't see Vanessa as his true daughter. That's when Emma made the decision that would change all our lives. She told Henry that she couldn't stay married to a man who would deliberately hurt her child, who would exclude Vanessa from family celebrations, and then refuse to acknowledge the cruelty of his actions. Emma was choosing her children over her marriage love, over convenience, and the truth over the comfortable lies she had been telling herself for years. As a mother who had once made similar difficult choices to protect my own daughter, I had never been more proud of Emma than I was in that moment. What followed Emma's declaration was perhaps the most painful and necessary 24 hours our family had ever endured. Henry's initial response was disbelief. He genuinely seemed shocked that his wife would choose her daughter over their marriage, as if 18 years together should have earned him the right to treat Vanessa as he pleased without consequences. But as the reality of Emma's decision sank in, Henry's shock transformed into something uglier. He began making threats about custody of Marcus and Isabella, claiming that Emma was breaking up their family over nothing that she was being manipulated by her interfering mother. The irony of him accusing me of manipulation while standing in my living room wasn't lost on anyone present. I gave Henry 24 hours to pack his belongings and find somewhere else to live. As the homeowner, I had every legal right to ask him to leave, especially since his name had never been on any lease or ownership documents. Henry tried to argue that Texas law gave him tenant rights, but a quick call to my attorney confirmed that his situation was far more precarious than he had imagined. The hardest part was watching Marcus and Isabella try to understand why their father was packing boxes and talking about finding an apartment. At 14 and 12, they were old enough to sense the gravity of what was happening, but too young to fully comprehend the complexities of adult relationships and family dynamics. Emma handled their questions with the same gentle honesty she had always shown as a mother. She explained that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt other people, and when those mistakes can't be fixed, families have to make hard choices to protect the people they love. She assured them that they would still see their father regularly, that this separation wasn't about him being a bad person, but about creating a safer environment for everyone in the family. Vanessa surprised us all with her maturity during this crisis. Instead of gloating over Henry's departure or expressing anger about the years of subtle mistreatment, she focused on comforting her younger siblings. She helped Marcus pack his favorite belongings for visits with his father and assured Isabella that nothing would change about their sister relationship. The logistics of separation fell into place with surprising efficiency. Henry found a 2-bedroom apartment across town within his budget, close enough for regular visitation, but far enough to give our household space to heal. Emma arranged her nursing schedule to accommodate the children's emotional needs during this transition. As I watched Henry load the last of his possessions into his truck, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the 18 years Emma had invested in this marriage, for the dreams of family unity that were dissolving before our eyes. But relief that Vanessa would no longer have to endure the daily reminder that her stepfather saw her as less worthy of love than his biological children. Our family was smaller now, but it was also healthier. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove toxic influences, even when those influences have been part of your life for nearly 2 decades. 6 months have passed since that devastating August birthday party, and I am writing this story from the same kitchen table where Emma and I had our life-changing conversation that night. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, despite being occupied by one fewer person. There's a piece here that I didn't even realize we had been missing during all those years of walking on eggshells around Henry's subtle cruelties. Vanessa has blossomed in ways that break my heart to witness, because her transformation reveals just how much Henry's favoritism had been weighing on her spirit. She laughs more freely, now participates in family discussions without that guarded expression she had worn for so many years. Her grades have improved, and she has even started talking about college applications with genuine excitement instead of resigned obligation. The younger children have adjusted better than any of us expected. Marcus and Isabella spend alternate weekends with their father, and while those transitions aren't always smooth, they have begun to understand that families can have different configurations while still being built on love. Henry has been making an effort with them during his visitation time, perhaps finally recognizing that his children are watching how he treats the people they care about. Emma has grown into her strength as a single mother in ways that remind me of the fierce young woman who raised Vanessa alone in those early years. She is working fewer extra shifts now, spending more time at home, and I can see her confidence rebuilding day by day. The guilt she carried for enabling Henry's behavior is slowly being replaced by pride in the difficult but necessary choice she made to protect her daughter. As for me, I have learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is reveal a truth at exactly the right moment. That house deed sat in my purse for 4 years, waiting for the day when someone needed to be reminded that authority comes with responsibility and power should always be used to protect those who are vulnerable. The real lesson from our family's crisis isn't about money or gifts or even divorce. It's about the fundamental truth that family is defined by love commitment and the daily choice to show up for each other. DNA might create biological connections, but it takes intentional love to build a family. Henry couldn't understand that distinction, couldn't see that Vanessa had been his daughter in every way that mattered from the moment he chose to marry her mother. His loss has become our gain because now we are a family united by choice rather than divided by arbitrary definitions of belonging. If you are watching this and you have experienced favoritism in your own family, please know that you deserve better. Love isn't rationed based on genetics, and no child should have to earn their place at the family table. And if you are a parent in a blended family, remember that every child under your roof is looking to you for proof that they belong. What's your family story? Have you ever had to make difficult choices to protect the people you love? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real family stories that matter. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up.